Man abandons boy alone in the forest with a shovel, but what he does next surprises everyone. Ethan watched as the man disappeared further among the trees until his figure vanished completely. The 11-year-old boy clutched the shovel's eedy handle to his chest, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on welling up. Richard had promised he would return, but his words rang hollow, like all the other promises he'd made before. The pile of dirt beside Ethan seemed to mock his situation. All morning, Richard had forced him to dig, saying only that it was for his own good. Now, alone in the woods surrounding the small town of Green Valley, deep in Kentucky, the boy began to realize he'd been deceived once again. "He's not coming back," Ethan murmured to himself, his voice choked. The cruel reality began to sink in. He had no food, wasn't entirely sure where he was, and the afternoon already showed signs of fading into dusk. But something inside him refused to surrender to despair. Instead of sitting down to cry, Ethan looked at the shovel in his hands and made a decision that would change not only his life, but the entire community's. The boy began digging again, but this time with a completely different purpose. He didn't know why, but he felt that this earth held something important. His small hands trembled with effort, but he kept going. With every scoop, memories of his grandmother Ruth came to mind. She always said that when he didn't know what to do, he should trust his heart. Ruth had raised Ethan since he was a baby, after her daughter Jessica had left home and never returned. The 72-year-old woman worked as a seamstress in town, and despite all their financial struggles, there had never been a lack of love in their small home on Blossom Street. What she didn't know was that Richard, the man who had arrived in town 3 months earlier claiming to be Ethan's uncle, had lied about his true intentions. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard had entered their lives with a convincing story. He said he was Jessica's brother and had spent years searching for her and Ethan. Ruth, her heart aching with longing for her daughter, had believed every word. The man was persuasive, well-dressed, and seemed genuinely interested in Ethan. But his true motivations were far darker and more selfish. That morning, Richard had woken Ethan before dawn, saying they had a special mission to complete. The boy, who had sensed something off about his supposed uncle's behavior for weeks, hesitated. But Richard insisted, talking about how important it was for Ethan to learn to be independent and brave. "Grandma Ruth will be so proud when she hears what you managed to do on your own," Richard had said, placing the shovel in the boy's hands. On the way to the woods, Ethan repeatedly tried to ask where they were going and what they would do there, but Richard only smiled strangely and changed the subject. The boy's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but his respectful upbringing kept him from questioning an adult more directly. When they arrived, Richard pointed to a specific spot among the trees and ordered Ethan to start digging. The boy obeyed, thinking it might be part of some game or test. But as the hours passed and Richard just watched with an increasingly tense expression, Ethan began to realize this was no game. "Keep digging," Richard repeated whenever Ethan paused to rest. "It's important that you finish this." Now alone in that place, Ethan kept digging with a determination even he didn't fully understand. It was as if his hands knew something his mind hadn't yet grasped. The earth was softer there, unlike the hard soil in the rest of the area. Something had been buried in that spot. He was sure of it. After another hour of hard work, Ethan's shovel hit something solid. His heart raced. Carefully, he cleared the dirt around it and uncovered a small metal box, rusted with time. His hands trembled as he lifted it from the hole. The box wasn't locked, just sealed with a simple latch that gave way easily. Inside, Ethan found something that left him utterly bewildered. Old photographs, letters yellowed with age, and a small notebook with notes. The photos showed a young woman he immediately recognized as his mother, Jessica, but in moments he'd never seen before. She was smiling beside a man who wasn't Richard, holding a baby who was clearly Ethan. One of the letters was addressed, "To my son, Ethan." With shaking hands, he opened it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, unmistakably his mother's. "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've found what I left for you. I know you must be confused and afraid, but you need to know the truth about our family. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left to protect you. There are people who might use you to hurt me, and I could never allow that. Trust your grandmother, Ruth. She knows more than she lets on. And be careful of anyone who claims to be family. Not everyone has good intentions. I love you more than anything. Love, Mom. Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. The letter had been written years ago, yet it felt like a direct warning about Richard. How could his mother have foreseen this? And what did she mean about people using him to hurt her? The boy packed everything back into the box and looked around. The sun was already setting and he needed to find his way home, but something told him he couldn't just return and hand the box over to Ruth. He needed to understand more. Using the skills he'd learned from his adventures in the woods behind the house, Ethan navigated by the stars beginning to appear in the sky. The walk back was long and full of obstacles, but his determination outweighed his fear. He carried the box tucked under his shirt, close to his chest. When he finally reached home, it was past 9 at night. Ruth was frantic at the gate, flanked by 2 neighbors helping her search for him. The moment she spotted Ethan rounding the corner, she ran toward him with tears in her eyes. "Ethan! Oh my God, where were you? Richard said you 2 were going for a walk, but that was this morning. I was about to call." She stopped speaking when she saw the grave look on her grandson's face. "Grandma, I need to talk to you." "Alone," Ethan said, locking eyes with Ruth. Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor who'd been helping, sensed the tension and quickly excused herself. Ruth led Ethan inside, noticing how dirty he was and the way he clutched something beneath his shirt. "What happened, sweetheart? Where's Richard?" Ethan hesitated, then pulled the box from under his shirt and placed it on the kitchen table. Ruth paled at the sight of it. "Grandma, do you recognize this box?" Ruth approached slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She touched the rusted surface as if seeing a ghost. "Ethan, where did you find this?" "Richard took me into the woods and forced me to dig. Then he left me there. I found this buried. And there's a letter from my mom inside." Ethan watched Ruth's face grow even paler. He left you in the woods." Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan opened the box and showed its contents to his grandmother. Ruth picked up the letter carefully, as if it were something sacred. Her eyes filled with tears as she read. "I knew this day would come," she murmured, "but I never thought it would be like this." "Grandma, what's going on? Why did my mom write? About people who might use me to hurt her. And who is Richard, really?" Ruth sank heavily into the chair, seeming to have aged 10 years in just a few minutes. She looked at Ethan with an expression that mixed love, protection, and deep sadness. "My grandson. Your mother didn't leave home by choice. She ran away to protect you and Richard. Richard isn't your uncle. Richard isn't. He's Jessica's biological father, but not the good man he should have been." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Richard was his grandfather, but why would Jessica describe him as a threat? When Jessica was only 17, Ruth continued, she discovered things about her father she was never meant to know. Things related to shady dealings in town. Richard has always been an influential person here in Green Valley, but his methods weren't always honest. Jessica confronted him and he threatened her. What kind of threat? He said if she told anyone what she knew, something terrible would happen to you. Jessica was just a child when she had you, Ethan. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. So she decided to run away, taking you as a baby, and came to live with me. Richard never knew where we were until he showed up here 3 months ago," Ethan finished, understanding. "Exactly. Somehow he found out where we were. But I hoped maybe he had changed, that he truly wanted to meet his grandson. I was wrong." Ethan felt a mix of anger and confusion. His whole life had been built on lies and secrets. But one thing was clear. Richard had used him to try to find something Jessica had hidden. "Grandma, there's more in the box. Photographs. And a notebook," Ethan said, spreading the contents on the table. Ruth examined each item carefully. The photos showed Jessica in happy moments Ruth hadn't known, likely from the time she had disappeared before returning with baby Ethan. But it was the notebook that caught her attention most. "This is a record," Ruth murmured, flipping through the pages. Jessica documented everything she found out about her father. Names, dates, places. Ethan looked over his grandmother's shoulder. The notes were detailed and organized. Jessica had discovered Richard was involved in a scheme to buy rural land for dirt-cheap prices, taking advantage of families in financial trouble. Then he'd resell that land to big companies for much higher prices, without telling the original sellers the true value of their property. This is fraud," Ethan said, grasping the gravity of it. "Yes, my boy. And many families in the area lost their land because of it, including our old farm." Ethan looked at Ruth in surprise. He hadn't known their family had owned a farm. "We had land, what do you mean? Before you were born, our family had a small farm that belonged to your great-grandfather. When he passed, we inherited it, but we were struggling financially. And a man came offering help. That man was Richard." Ruth paused to drink a glass of water, her hands still trembling slightly. Ethan waited patiently, sensing how hard this was for his grandmother. "Richard offered us a loan, using the farm, as collateral. He said the terms were special, very generous. But when we couldn't pay on time, he called in the debt and took the property. Only later did we learn the farm was worth 10 times what he'd loaned us. And my mom found out about this?" "Yes." Jessica was very smart and observant. She began investigating on her own and discovered that Richard had done the same thing to dozens of families in the area. She gathered evidence, documents, everything she could find. Ethan looked at the notebook again. Now he understood why Richard had insisted so much that he dig in that specific spot. He knew Jessica had hidden the evidence somewhere and was using Ethan to find it. "Grandma, we need to do something with this information." "I know, my boy, but it's dangerous. If Richard finds out we have this..." At that moment, they heard footsteps on the front porch. Ruth and Ethan exchanged glances, fear written on their faces. The footsteps approached the door, followed by firm knocks. "Ruth, it's me, Richard. I need to talk to you." Ethan quickly put everything back in the box and hid it under the kitchen sink. Ruth took a deep breath and went to the door, but didn't open it. "Richard, it's late. What do you want?" "I want to know if Ethan made it home safely. I was worried when he got lost in the woods." "Got lost?" Ruth's voice carried a hint of indignation she tried to control. "You left him there." "That's not what happened, Ruth. The boy got distracted, and by the time I noticed, he was gone. I searched for hours before coming here." Ethan, hidden in the kitchen, clenched his fists. Richard's lie was shameless and cruel. He had been abandoned on purpose. No doubt about it. "He's home safe, but he's asleep," Ruth lied. "You can leave. I'd like to see him just to make sure he's okay. You can see him tomorrow, now go." There was a moment of silence on the other side of the door. Then they heard footsteps slowly walking away. Ruth waited a few minutes before returning to the kitchen. "He hasn't given up," she said. "Richard knows you found something." "How could he know?" "Because that was the only reason he took you there. He knew where Jessica had hidden the evidence. He probably tortured her with threats until she told him." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. His mother had suffered so much to protect him, and now he was at the center of the same danger. "Grandma, where is my mother now?" Ruth hesitated, as if deciding how much of the truth she could share. "I'm not sure, my boy." She wrote me a few letters over the years, but she never said where she was, only that she was safe and thought of you every day. Could she come back? If we find a way to stop Richard? Maybe. But first we need to figure out what to do with this evidence. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of raised voices in the living room. Peeking through the crack in his bedroom door, he saw Ruth talking to a woman he recognized as Mrs. Johnson, the lady who worked at the town records office. "Ruth, I need to warn you about something," Mrs. Johnson said quietly. "Richard was at the records office yesterday afternoon, asking about old documents related to your family." "What kind of documents?" "Mostly about the old farm. He said he was settling inheritance matters, But I thought it was strange. After all these years, why would he care now? Ethan stepped out of his room and approached the two women. Mrs. Johnson greeted him warmly, as she always did, but he noticed worry in her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," Ethan said politely. "Ethan, I'm so glad you're safe. Your grandmother told me you had a scare yesterday." "Mrs. Johnson," Ethan interrupted, "do you know the story of our old farm well?" The woman looked at Ruth, who nodded, confirming it was okay to talk about it. "I do, dear. It was a very sad situation. Your family had one of the most beautiful properties in the region. Do you think there's still any way to undo what happened?" Mrs. Johnson thought for a moment before answering, "Well, if there were proof that the transaction was done deceitfully or illegally, it might theoretically be possible to challenge it in court. But after so many years, it would be very difficult." Ethan and Ruth exchanged glances. The evidence Jessica had gathered might be exactly what they needed. "Mrs. Johnson," Ruth said carefully, "if someone had documents proving irregularities in that deal, what should they do? Take them to a trusted lawyer? But Ruth, why these questions? Did something happen?" Before Ruth could answer, they heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Mrs. Johnson looked out the window and her face paled. "It's Richard, and he's not alone." Ethan rushed to the window and saw Richard stepping out of a black car accompanied by two men he didn't recognize. The three walked toward the front door with determined steps. "Mrs. Johnson, can you leave through the back?" Ruth whispered. "I can, but..." "Go. It's not safe for... you hear?" Mrs. Johnson quickly grabbed her purse and headed for the back door. Before leaving, she turned to Ethan. "Son, if you need help, go see Dr. Thompson at the law office on Main Street. He's an honest man." The knocking began before Mrs. Johnson could even get out. Ruth took a deep breath and went to answer, while Ethan quickly checked to make sure the box was still well hidden. "Ruth, good morning," Richard said when she opened the door. "These are my associates. We're here to settle an important matter." "What matter?" "About something my grandson might have found yesterday in the woods." Ruth tried to stay calm, but Ethan could see her tension. "I don't know what you're talking about. Ruth, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. The boy found something that doesn't belong to him. We just want what's ours back." "And what exactly would that be?" Ruth asked, crossing her arms. One of the men with Richard stepped forward. He was tall, thin, and had visible scars on his hands. "Ma'am, it'd be best for everyone if you cooperated. We're looking for some documents that were misplaced many years ago." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. These men didn't seem like the kind you could negotiate with peacefully. "There are no documents here," Ruth said firmly. "Then you won't mind if we take a look," Richard said, signaling for the men to enter. "You have no right to come into my home." "Ruth, dear, technically this house is built on land that was part of the old farm, and I'm the legal owner of that land. So yes, I do have the right." Ethan's blood boiled. Richard was using his own dishonesty to intimidate Ruth. He stepped out of the kitchen and stood beside his grandmother. "Grandpa," Ethan said, using the term sarcastically, "I didn't find anything in the woods. You left me there and I only made it home because I learned to navigate by the stars." Richard looked at Ethan with an expression mixing false concern and suspicion. "Ethan, my boy, you don't understand. There are important things that need to be found, things your mother hid that could hurt a lot of people if they fell into the wrong hands." "What kind of things?" "Fake documents she created to try to ruin my reputation. Your mother was confused at the time. She made baseless accusations." Ethan stared straight into Richard's eyes. "If the documents are fake, why are you so worried about finding them?" The question caught Richard off guard. He hesitated before answering. "Because even if they're fake, they could be used to cause unnecessary trouble." "I see," Ethan said, pretending to accept the explanation. "But I really didn't find anything, just dirt and more dirt." One of the men with Richard stepped up to Ethan in a threatening way. "Kid, you better tell the truth. We know you found something." "Leave the boy alone," shouted Ruth, stepping between Ethan and the man. "Ruth, please," said Richard with false politeness. "We're just trying to handle this as civilly as possible." "Civilly? You broke into my house and are intimidating a child." "No one's intimidating anyone. We're just talking." Richard motioned to the two men who began spreading out through the house, obviously searching for something. Ruth protested, but was ignored. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they found the box. He had to act fast. He looked around and saw one of the men heading toward the kitchen. "Wait!" Ethan shouted. I might have found something after all." Everyone turned to look at him. Ruth stared at him with panic in her eyes, but Ethan tried to reassure her with a glance. "What did you find?" asked Richard, struggling to keep the eagerness out of his voice. "Some sheets of paper. They were soaked and torn. I brought them home but threw them away because I couldn't read anything. Where's the trash? It was picked up early this morning." Richard's expression turned furious. "You threw important documents in the trash." "I didn't know they were important. They just looked like old, dirty papers." Richard stepped toward Ethan with clenched fists. Ruth instinctively moved in front of her grandson. "Richard, he's just a boy. He didn't know those papers could be valuable." "You don't understand the gravity of the situation," Richard said through gritted teeth. "Those old papers could ruin a lot of lives, or reveal the truth about how you ruined the lives of many families," Ethan said bravely. The silence that followed was tense and dangerous. Richard looked at Ethan with an expression the boy had never seen before. Pure malice. "What did you just say?" "I said maybe those papers show how you tricked families in the area to steal their land." "Ethan!" Ruth tried to interrupt, but it was too late. "Ah, so you knew what was in the documents," Richard said with a cruel smile. "Interesting. That means you must have read something before throwing them away." Ethan realized he'd made a mistake. Richard was sharper than he'd thought. I just guessed. From what Grandma Ruth told me about our old farm." "Ruth told you? Stories? What kind of stories?" "Leave the boy alone," Ruth shouted. "You've searched the whole house and found nothing. Now get out." "Not until we're sure there's really nothing here," said one of the men who had returned from the kitchen. Ethan's heart raced. Had he found the box? "Boss," the man said to Richard, "there's something odd under the sink. Marks in the dust like something was hidden there recently." Richard smiled in satisfaction. "Interesting. Ethan, you sure you didn't hide anything under the sink?" "I'm sure." Ethan lied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Then you won't mind if we check." Richard headed to the kitchen, followed by the two men. Ruth and Ethan trailed behind, knowing they had no choice. In the kitchen, Richard pointed under the sink. "Frank, take a look there." The man crouched down and began examining the spot. Ethan knew the box was well hidden, but his hands had left marks in the dust when he'd placed it there. "There is something here," Frank said, reaching deep into the cabinet. Ethan closed his eyes, knowing it was over. But when Frank stood up, he was holding only an old dusty floor rag. "Just this," he said, sounding disappointed. Ethan could hardly believe it. How was that possible? He was sure he had hidden the box exactly in that spot. "Are you sure?" asked Richard, clearly frustrated. "I am. There's just this old rag and some spider webs." Richard looked around the kitchen suspiciously, but there was nothing else to investigate. After a few minutes, he signaled for the men to leave. "Ruth, this isn't over," he said before walking out. "If we find out you're hiding something, the consequences will be serious." "Are you threatening us?" asked Ruth. "I'm just saying it would be better for everyone if you cooperated." After the three men left, Ruth and Ethan stayed silent for a few minutes, still processing what had happened. "Ethan," Ruth finally said, "how come the box wasn't under the sink?" "I don't get it either, Grandma. I know I put it there." The two went back to the kitchen and Ruth crouched down to examine the spot. To her surprise, she found the box pushed all the way to the back behind some pipes, in a spot that wasn't visible unless someone crawled completely into the cabinet. "It was here the whole time," Ruth murmured. "Frank just didn't look hard." "Enough. Or maybe he didn't want to find it," Ethan said thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "Grandma, what if Frank isn't on Richard's side? What if he purposely didn't find the box?" Ruth considered the possibility. It could be. Richard might have forced a lot of people to work for him against their will. "I need to find out more about these men," said Ethan, "and what kind of power Richard has in town." "Ethan, that's dangerous. You're just a kid." "I am, but I'm also the only one who can fix this. Mom left this evidence for me, not anyone else. Ruth looked at her grandson with a mix of pride and worry. He was growing up too fast, forced by circumstances to face problems no child should have to. "All right," she said finally, "but we won't do this alone. We'll get help." Mrs. Johnson mentioned a lawyer, Dr. Thompson. "Yes, he's a good option. Michael Thompson is an honest man and knows the law well. Can we go talk to him today?" But first let's study what Jessica left in the box more carefully. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. For the rest of the morning, Ruth and Ethan carefully examined every document, every photograph, every note in Jessica's notebook. What they found was even more shocking than they'd imagined. Jessica hadn't just documented Richard's shady land deals. She had discovered he was involved in a much larger corruption scheme that included forging documents, bribing public officials, and rigging property auctions. "Look at this, Grandma," Ethan said, pointing to a specific page in the notebook. Mom wrote about a secret meeting she witnessed. Ruth read the note aloud. "March 15th, 2010. I overheard Dad talking in his office with the mayor and two men I didn't know. They were planning how to make the Mitchell family lose their farm to the city over non-existent tax debts. Then the property would be auctioned to a shell company Dad controls. The Mitchell family doesn't even know they're being cheated." "The Mitchell family," Ruth murmured. "They lost their farm a few years ago. They said they owed taxes to the city. But according to this, the debts were fake." Ethan kept reading and found dozens of similar cases. Richard had developed a complex system to steal land from vulnerable families, always using methods that seemed legal on the surface. "Now I understand why he was so desperate to find this," said Ruth. "If this information goes public, he won't just lose money. He'll go to jail. And all those families will be able to get their land back? It's possible, but it'll be a very complicated legal battle." "Grandma, there's something else here I don't understand," said Ethan, showing some photographs. "These pictures of my mom, she looks older than when she had me, and she's in places I don't recognize." Ruth examined the photographs carefully. In some, Jessica was smiling next to people Ruth didn't know. In others, she was in landscapes that clearly weren't from Green Valley. "These photos are from after she ran away," said Ruth slowly. "She must have had a new life somewhere else." "So she's alive and well?" "I hope so, my boy." "Grandma, there's a photo here that shows my mom holding a piece of paper. It looks like an address." Ruth took the photograph and studied it closely. Indeed, Jessica was holding a small piece of paper with something written on it, but the image wasn't clear enough to read. "Maybe it's a clue to where she is," said Ethan hopefully. "Maybe, but first we need to handle the situation here. Your mother can only come back when it's safe." That afternoon, Ruth and Ethan went to Dr. Michael Thompson's office. The lawyer was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a calm way of speaking that inspired trust. "Ruth, it's been so long," he greeted them as they walked in. "And this must be Ethan, the one I've heard so much about." "Dr. Thompson, we came here because we need help with a very serious problem," said Ruth. "Of course, have a seat and tell me everything." Ruth and Ethan recounted the whole situation: Richard's appearance, the abandonment in the woods, the discovery of the box, and the threats they'd received. Dr. Thompson listened quietly, taking occasional notes. "Did you bring the documents?" he asked when they finished. Ethan carefully opened the box and showed the contents. Dr. Thompson examined each item with professional attention. "This is very serious," he said finally. "If this information is true, we're talking about multiple crimes that affected dozens of families. Do you think we can do anything?" asked Ethan. "We can and should, but I need to be honest with you, it'll be a difficult and dangerous battle. Richard has a lot of power and influence in the area." "What kind of danger?" asked Ruth. "He might try to intimidate you even more. He could use his influence to cause problems for you in town. And he might even, well, desperate people do desperate things." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach, but his determination remained firm. "Dr. Thompson, if we do nothing, those families will never get justice, and my mother will never be able to come back." "You're right, Ethan, and I admire your courage. We'll do this, but very carefully." "What's the first step?" asked Ruth. First, I'll need to authenticate these documents. Then, we'll file a formal complaint. But before that, I need to ensure your safety. How so? Richard has already shown he's willing to use intimidation. When he finds out you've hired a lawyer, he might escalate his actions. What do you suggest? That you stay at a relative's or friend's house for a few days while I start the legal process. Somewhere Richard wouldn't think to look. Ruth thought for a moment. I have a sister who lives in Three Rivers. She's always said our home is open to us. Perfect. Pack your bags and go there today. But first I need to make copies of all these documents. While Dr. Thompson copied the documents, Ethan had an idea. Doctor, Michael, could you also look into a man named Frank? He was with Richard today, but I have a feeling he might not be working for him willingly. Interesting, why do you think that? Because he had the chance to find the box we hid, but he didn't. Or he pretended not to find it. I'll look into it. It's possible Richard forced some people to help him. 2 hours later, Ruth and Ethan were at the Green Valley bus station, waiting for the bus to Three Rivers. Ruth carried a small suitcase with clothes, while Ethan kept the original box, hidden in his school backpack. Grandma, do you think we did the right thing? I think we did the only thing we could, my boy. What if Richard finds out where we are? Dr. Thompson promised he'd work quickly. With any luck, by the time we return, Richard will be in jail. The bus arrived and they boarded. Ethan chose a seat by the window and watched Green Valley fade into the distance. It was the first time in his life he'd left town, and under different circumstances, it would have been an exciting adventure. But now all he could think about was his mother and how much she'd sacrificed to protect him. During the trip, Ruth told stories about her sister Margaret and what life was like in Three Rivers. Ethan tried to listen, but his mind was busy, planning what they'd do when they returned. Grandma, when this is all over, do you think we'll be able to get our old farm back? It's possible, Ethan. But even if we don't, what matters is that the truth comes out. I want more than that. I want all the families who were hurt to get justice, and I want my mom to come home. Ruth smiled, impressed by her grandson's maturity. Your heart is just like your mother's. Jessica always wanted to fight for justice even when it put her in danger. Is that why she ran away? To protect me? Yes, and now you're doing exactly what she would have done, fighting for what's right. When they arrived in Three Rivers, they were warmly welcomed by Margaret, a 65-year-old woman who had the same kindness as Ruth, but a more determined spirit. Ruth, Ethan, what a wonderful surprise, she exclaimed, hugging them both. But from the look on your face, Ruth, this isn't just a social visit. Margaret, we need to stay here for a few days. We're in serious trouble back in Green Valley. Of course you can stay. My house is too big for just one person anyway. But tell me, what kind of trouble? Over dinner, Ruth explained the whole situation to Margaret, who listened with growing outrage. That Richard is nothing but a crook, she exclaimed. And you did the right thing seeking legal help. Margaret, do you know anyone here in Three Rivers who could help us? Ethan asked. Maybe someone who works in media or journalism. Why, dear? Because I think it might be important for people in the area to know what's happening. If Richard has so much power in Green Valley, we might need outside help. Margaret thought for a moment. I do. My neighbor, Mr. Peterson, worked as a journalist for many years. He's retired now, but he still has contacts in local newspapers and radio stations. Do you think he'd help us? I'm sure of it. Peterson has always been against corruption and injustice. Can we talk to him tomorrow? Of course, but for now you both need rest. It's been a very heavy day. That night, Ethan struggled to sleep. His mind wouldn't stop processing everything that had happened. In just 2 days, his life had completely changed. He'd learned that his uncle was actually his grandfather and a criminal, found evidence that his mother was alive, and started a legal battle that could change many lives. But there was something else bothering him. A feeling that she was forgetting some important detail about the box or the information Jessica had left. In the morning, Ruth woke Ethan early. Ethan, Dr. Thompson called. He wants to talk to us urgently. Did something happen? He didn't want to discuss it over the phone, but said he discovered very important things about Richard. They headed to the nearest payphone and called Dr. Thompson back. Ruth, Ethan, good to hear from you. said the lawyer's voice. "Through the line. I have news. Some good, some concerning." "Tell us everything," said Ruth. "First, I managed to authenticate the documents. They're all genuine and provide more than enough evidence to prosecute Richard for multiple crimes. And the concerning news, Richard found out you consulted a lawyer, and he's not happy at all." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "How did he find out?" "Someone must have seen you entering my office. Green Valley is a small town. What did he do?" "He came to my office last night with the same 2 men who were with him at his house, tried to intimidate me, said if I stuck my nose where it didn't belong, there'd be consequences. Dr. Thompson, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I don't intimidate easily, and I have influential friends too. But the situation has gotten complicated." "In what way?" "Richard is spreading word around town that you stole important documents from him. He's trying to flip the script, playing the victim. That's ridiculous." "I know, Ruth, but some people are believing." "Richard is very persuasive." Ethan took the phone. "Dr. Thompson, we need to speed up the process. If we wait too long to act, Richard will control the entire narrative." "I agree, Ethan. I've already prepared the formal complaint and will file it today. But I want you both to stay away from Green Valley for a few more days." "Dr. Ethan had an idea," Ruth interrupted. "He wants to talk to the local press." "That's a good idea. Public exposure might be our best protection against Richard's intimidation." "We know a journalist here in Three Rivers," said Ethan. "We'll try to speak with him today." "Perfect. But be careful what you say. Richard might try to use your words against you." After hanging up, Ruth and Ethan went to Mr. Peterson's house. The 70-year-old man welcomed them into his study, filled with books and journalism awards. "Margaret told me a bit about your situation," he said after greetings. "It seems you've uncovered a very serious corruption scheme." "Exactly," said Ethan, "and we have proof. May I see?" Ethan carefully opened the box and showed some of the most important documents. Mr. Peterson examined them with a professional eye. "This is pure dynamite," he murmured. "If this is true, it'll cause a huge scandal in the region." "It is true," said Ruth. "My daughter gathered this evidence years ago, but had to flee to protect herself. And now you've decided to take action? We couldn't let other families be harmed," said Ethan. Mr. Peterson smiled approvingly. "You're brave. I'll help you. I have contacts at 3 regional newspapers and 2 radio stations. We can make this public quickly." "Is there any risk for you?" asked Ruth. "There's always risk when fighting corruption. But that's journalism's job, to reveal the truth." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, for the rest of the day, Mr. Peterson worked on a detailed article about Richard's scheme based on the evidence Jessica had gathered. He explained to Ethan and Ruth how the publication process worked and what reactions to expect. "When the article is published tomorrow," he said, "you'll become public figures. There will be journalists wanting to interview you, people wanting to know more details, and also those who'll try to discredit you." "We're ready," said Ethan with determination. "I hope so. Because once this goes public, there's no turning back." That night, while Ruth talked with Margaret, Ethan locked himself in the room they were using and examined all the photographs of his mother again. There was something in them that bothered him, some detail that seemed important, but he couldn't quite place. Then he noticed something he'd overlooked before. In one of the photos, Jessica was standing in front of a sign that read, "Welcome to St. Lawrence." Ethan knew St. Lawrence. It was just 2 hours from Three Rivers. His heart raced. Could his mother have been living so close all this time? He examined more photos and found more clues. A pharmacy with a specific name, a square with distinctive features, even a city bus with a visible number. Ethan rushed out of the room. "Grandma, Margaret, I found out where my mother is." The 2 women turned in surprise. "What do you mean, Ethan?" "The photos, they show she's in St. Lawrence, look." He spread the photographs on the table and pointed to the details he'd noticed. "It might just be a coincidence," Ruth said cautiously. "Maybe she only visited the town." "No, Grandma, look here. Ethan showed a specific photo. She's holding keys in front of a house. And look at the background. It's the same square that appears in other pictures. Margaret stepped closer to examine them. The boy's right, Ruth. These photos suggest she really lived there. Lived or still lives, Ethan corrected hopefully. Ethan, even if she's there, we can't just show up in town looking for her, said Ruth. St. Lawrence isn't that small. But we can try. What if she's still there? What if she doesn't know it's safe to come back now? My dear, first we need to finish what we started with Richard. Your mother won't truly be safe until he can't threaten her anymore. Ethan knew Ruth was right, but the possibility of finding his mother left him restless the rest of the night. The next morning, Mr. Peterson woke them early with news. The article was published in 2 newspapers and will be read on the radio in an hour, he announced, and we already have the first reactions. What kind of reactions? Dr. Thompson called. He said there's been movement at Green Valley's City Hall since early morning. It seems several people are asking how to recover lost properties. Is that good? It's great. It means other affected families are learning about this and might join the fight. And Richard? No direct news from him yet, but Dr. Thompson thinks he's probably trying to contain the damage. Throughout the morning, they received several calls, some from journalists wanting more information, others from people who identified themselves as victims of Richard's scheme. One call stood out, from a woman named Barbara who introduced herself as Frank's wife. I heard about the report, she said nervously. My husband works for Richard, but not by choice. What do you mean? Asked Ruth. Richard has been blackmailing my husband for 2 years. He threatens our family if Frank doesn't do what he says. What kind of blackmail? Richard found out my husband had trouble with drinking in the past and lost a job because of it. Now he threatens to spread it around town and ruin our reputation if Frank doesn't obey. Ethan remembered his suspicion that Frank had deliberately failed to find the box. Mrs. Barbara, was your husband with Richard when they searched our house? He had the chance to find something important we hid, but he didn't. He told me that. Said he saw where you hid it, but pretended he found nothing. Why? Because he's tired of being used by Richard. When he found out you were trying to expose the truth, he decided to help in the way he could. Would he be willing to testify against Richard? I think so, especially now that others are standing up against him. That call changed everything. If Frank could testify about Richard's activities, we'd have not just documentary evidence, but also a witness. Let's call Dr. Thompson, said Ruth. When they reached the lawyer, he was thrilled by the news. This is excellent, he said. With Frank's testimony, our position becomes much stronger. Doctor, how are things in Green Valley? Complicated for Richard. The report caused quite a stir, and several people are looking for lawyers. The City Hall is getting lots of questions about property acquisition processes. And Richard's reaction? He's trying to discredit you. Spread that Ethan is just a kid being manipulated by adults and that the documents could be fake. Is anyone buying it? Some people, yes. But most are more interested in whether they've been wronged too. When can we go back to Green Valley? It's still not safe, but maybe tomorrow we can arrange an escort for you to come to my office. That afternoon, Ethan had an idea. Grandma, what if we tried to find my mom in St. Lawrence while we wait for things to settle? Ethan, think about it. If we find her, she might have more information about Richard. And if the legal process goes wrong, at least we'd be reunited. Ruth considered the proposal. The truth was she missed Jessica too and would love to see her again. Margaret, could you come with us to St. Lawrence tomorrow? Of course. It'd be an adventure. Then let's try, Ruth decided. But first, we'll let Dr. Thompson know where we'll be. The next morning, the 3 of them took the bus to St. Lawrence. Ethan carried photos of Jessica, hoping someone in town would recognize her. St. Lawrence was bigger than he expected, but the photos gave specific clues about where to look. They started at the square, visible in the background of several pictures. There it is, Ethan said, pointing. It's exactly like the photos. They approached the square and began showing the photos to passers-by. Most didn't recognize Jessica, but an older man selling newspapers seemed interested. This young woman looks familiar, he said, studying a photo. But I'm not sure. Did she live around here? Maybe. There's a woman working at the public library who looks a bit like her, but her hair's different and she's older. Ethan's heart raced. Where's the library? 3 blocks that way. Dr. Williams Street, number 180. They hurried to the location. The library was an old, charming building with well-kept gardens out front. Ethan entered first, followed by Ruth and Margaret. Behind the front desk, a dark-haired woman was organizing books. When she turned to greet them, Ethan felt the world stop. It was Jessica, older, with shorter hair and glasses she didn't wear before, but it was definitely his mother. Jessica looked at the visitors, and her face paled when she recognized Ruth. Then her eyes locked onto Ethan, and she covered her mouth in shock. "Ethan," she whispered. "Mom!" Ethan shouted, running to hug her. The reunion was emotional and full of tears. Jessica held Ethan as if she'd never let go, while Ruth cried with joy in the back of the library. "How did you find me?" asked Jessica after the initial emotion passed. "The photographs," said Ethan, showing the images. "They had clues that you were here. You found the box." Jessica looked around nervously. "That means Richard—" "We know everything, dear," said Ruth, "and we're fighting against him." Jessica seemed relieved and terrified at the same time. "Come on, we can't talk here. My break is in 10 minutes. We can go to my house." Jessica's house was small but cozy, located on a quiet street 2 blocks from the library. Ethan observed everything curiously, trying to imagine what his mother's life had been like there. "Mom, why did you never try to contact us?" he asked when they sat in the living room. "Because I was afraid, my son. Richard is dangerous, and as long as he knew where I was, you wouldn't be safe. But how did you find out about him before running away?" Jessica sighed, as if gathering courage to tell a painful story. "Ethan, there are things about our family you don't know. Richard isn't just my biological father. He was also abusive toward me when I was a child." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. "What kind of abuse?" "Emotional, mostly. He controlled me completely, decided everything about my life. When I got pregnant with you, he wanted me to end the pregnancy. When I refused, he was furious." "Is that why you left home?" "At first, yes. I ran away to protect you and to have the freedom to raise my son the way I wanted. I went to live with your grandmother, Ruth, who was always like a mother to me." "But why did you leave again when I was 2? "Because I found out about Richard's shady dealings, and he threatened me. He said if I told anyone, something terrible would happen to you." Ruth, who had remained silent, moved closer to Jessica. "Dear, why didn't you tell me back then? We could have faced it together." "Mother Ruth, I was just a scared girl. Richard convinced me he had the power to carry out his threats, and he did." "How did you manage to gather all that evidence?" "For months I pretended to submit to his will. I moved back into his house and played the obedient daughter. That gave me access to his office and information he didn't expect me to understand." "And when he found out?" "He discovered I was collecting evidence when he caught me photographing documents. That's when I ran away for good. But first, I hid everything I'd gathered." "In the place where you took me to dig," said Ethan. "Exactly. It was a spot I knew from childhood, where I used to play. I knew it would be a good hiding place." "Mom, why did you leave clues in the photographs about where you were?" Jessica smiled sadly. "Because deep down I always hoped that one day you'd be smart and brave enough to find me, and I was right." "But how did you know I'd find the box?" "I didn't, but when I heard Richard had shown up in town looking for you, I figured he'd try to force me to reveal where I hid the evidence. It was only a matter of time before he used you to get what he wanted. He really did use me, made me dig for hours. My son, forgive me for putting you in that situation. If I'd known—" "Mom, you have nothing to apologize for. You protected me all along." Margaret, who had been moved watching the reunion, gently interrupted. "Jessica, you need to know the situation has changed." Ethan and Ruth decided to report Richard formally. Jessica paled. "You did what?" "Dear, we had to," said Ruth. "He was escalating his threats, and other families were still being hurt. But this is dangerous. Richard won't let—" "This slide. That's exactly why we need to act," said Ethan. "Running forever isn't a solution. Someone has to stop him." Jessica looked at her son with a mix of pride and fear. "You've grown, my boy. You're braver than I ever was. I learned from you. You were brave when you gathered all that evidence." "Mom," Ethan continued, "now that we've found each other, can you help us? Your testimony would be very important." Jessica considered the request for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back." "We're sure," Ruth and Ethan answered in unison. "Then let's end this, once and for all." That afternoon, Jessica called Dr. Thompson and introduced herself. The lawyer was thrilled to hear they had found the source of the evidence. "Jessica, your testimony could be decisive," he said. "You can confirm how you obtained this information and provide details about Richard's activities that aren't documented." "Dr. Thompson, how soon can I safely return to Green Valley? With you on our side, we can speed up the process. How about everyone comes here tomorrow? We can prepare the full formal complaint." "Agreed." That night, Ethan finally slept peacefully. For the first time in days. His mother was just a few feet away, and in the morning they would work together to seek justice. But he didn't know that Richard had discovered their location and was already planning his next move. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for Green Valley, Jessica received a call that changed everything. "Hello? Jessica, my dear. It's been so long." Richard's voice sent a chill through her. "How did you get my number?" "I have my ways. I heard you've reunited. How touching. What do you want?" "I want a conversation, a civilized talk between family." "We have nothing to talk about." "Oh, but we do. Especially about your son's future." Jessica felt her blood run cold. "If you lay a finger on Ethan..." Jessica, you've known me long enough to know I don't make empty threats, but you also know I'm a reasonable man. We can settle this in a way that satisfies everyone." "What exactly do you want?" "I want you to come to Green Valley alone. We'll talk and resolve this like adults. And if I don't? Then I'll have to take measures to protect my reputation and my business, measures that could affect people you love." Jessica looked at Ethan, who was in the kitchen helping Ruth make coffee. "I need time to think." "So you have until this afternoon. If you're not in my office by 5, I'll assume you've chosen the hard way." The call ended, leaving Jessica panicked. She knew exactly what Richard was capable of. "Mom, who was that?" Ethan asked, noticing her expression. "It was, about my work at the library. Nothing important." But Ruth could tell Jessica was lying. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Jessica hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "It was Richard. He found out where we are and wants me to go to Green Valley to talk." "You're not going, are you?" Ethan said immediately. "I don't. No, he made threats." "What kind of threats?" "The kind he always makes, threats about you." Ruth stepped closer to Jessica. "Darling, we can't give in to blackmail. If you go, he'll try to make you withdraw the complaints. And if I don't, he might hurt you." Ethan thought for a moment. "Mom, what if we all go together? He won't try anything in front of a crowd." "It's too risky." "Actually," Margaret said, "maybe that's exactly what we should do." Everyone turned to look at her. "Think about it. If Jessica shows up at Richard's office with you two, Dr. Thompson, and maybe even a reporter, he won't be able to act openly, and it'll be a chance to confront him directly." Jessica considered the idea. "It might work, but what if it's a trap? Then we'll face it together," said Ethan, "as a family." After much debate, they decided to follow Margaret's plan. They would call Dr. Thompson and Mr. Peterson, explain the situation, and go as a group for the final confrontation with Richard. Dr. Thompson initially opposed the idea, thinking it too risky. But when Jessica explained that Richard would keep threatening the family unless confronted directly, he agreed. "Let's do this, but very carefully," he said, "and I'll bring a recorder to document everything said." Mr. Peterson also agreed to join them, seeing the opportunity to witness the confrontation between Jessica and Richard as a great chance for a groundbreaking story. At 3 in the afternoon, a group of 6 headed to Green Valley: Jessica, Ethan, Ruth, Margaret, Dr. Thompson, and Mr. Peterson. During the trip, they discussed strategies and decided who would say what. "Remember," said Dr. Thompson, "the goal isn't to fight Richard, but to show he doesn't intimidate us. And if he admits any guilt, it'll be recorded. When they arrived in Green Valley, they went straight to Richard's office, located downtown. The building was imposing, clearly designed to impress and intimidate. The secretary tried to stop the group, but Dr. Thompson stood firm. "Tell Mr. Richard that Jessica is here with her lawyer for the meeting," he requested. A few minutes later, they were led to a conference room where Richard waited. He was accompanied only by Frank, who looked surprised and nervous upon seeing the group. "Jessica," said Richard with a fake smile, "glad you decided to come, but I didn't expect a delegation." "Dad, any conversation we have can be in front of my family and my lawyer." Of course. And who are these others?" "I'm Peterson, a journalist," introduced Mr. Peterson. "I'm covering this story." Richard's smile faded. "I don't see the need to involve the press in family matters. When family matters involve crimes affecting an entire community, it becomes a matter of public interest," replied Mr. Peterson calmly. Richard looked around the table, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Fine, Jessica. I came here to offer a reasonable solution to our disagreement." "What kind of solution?" "Simple. You withdraw all baseless accusations, publicly admit you fabricated false evidence out of personal resentment, and in return, I guarantee nothing happens to your family. And if I refuse, then I'll have to defend myself by any means necessary." Dr. Thompson leaned forward. "Mr. Richard, are you making threats in front of witnesses?" "I'm not making threats. I'm explaining the natural consequences of irresponsible actions." "Dad," said Jessica, "the evidence I gathered is all true and you know it. Prove it." Jessica opened her bag and took out a small recorder. "I can prove it, because I recorded some of our conversations 10 years ago." Richard's face went pale. "That's unacceptable." "Actually," said Dr. Thompson, "recordings made by one of the involved parties are perfectly admissible as evidence." Jessica turned on the recorder. Richard's voice from 10 years ago echoed through the room. "Jessica, you'll forget everything you've seen and heard. If you say a word to anyone about my business, I guarantee something very bad will happen to that boy. You know me well enough to know I'm not bluffing." Then Jessica's younger voice replied, "Dad, are you threatening your own grandson?" And Richard, "I'm protecting my family and my business. If you force me to choose between Ethan and my future, you won't like my choice." The silence in the room was deafening. Frank stared at Richard with an expression of disgust. "This recording could be forged," said Richard, but his voice was weak. "Father, there are dozens of hours of recordings, all documenting your illegal activities and threats." Richard stood abruptly. "This meeting is over." "Actually," said Dr. Thompson, "it's only just beginning." He pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "Mr. Richard, you are hereby formally notified that a criminal complaint has been filed against you for multiple offenses: fraud, extortion, threats, and corruption." Richard took the document and quickly scanned it, his expression growing darker by the second. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he muttered. "We know exactly who we're dealing with," said Ethan, speaking for the first time in the meeting. "A man who stole land from innocent families and threatened a child to keep his crimes hidden." Richard glared at Ethan with a mix of anger and something that might have been admiration. "You really are Jessica's son, too brave for your own good. And you're exactly what my mother told me you were, a coward who only picks on those weaker than him." The tension in the room was almost palpable. That's when Frank stood up. "Mr. Richard, I can't do this anymore." "Frank, sit down." "No, I've heard enough." Frank turned to Dr. Thompson. "Doctor, if you still need my testimony, I'm willing to tell everything I know about Mr. Richard's activities." "Frank, you're making a mistake," Richard said threateningly. "The mistake was working for you all these years." Richard looked around the room, realizing he had completely lost control. His empire of lies was crumbling fast. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "The only one who should regret anything here is you," Jessica replied, "for threatening your own grandson and stealing from so many families." Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Minutes later, they heard the sound of a car speeding away. "Is it over?" Ethan asked. "Not completely," said Dr. Thompson, "but we've taken a very important step today." In the weeks that followed, Richard's case became news across the region. More families came forward as victims, and the evidence piled up overwhelmingly. Richard tried to flee town, but was tracked down and arrested 2 weeks later. During his trial, over 30 families testified about how they had been deceived and robbed. Jessica, Ethan, and Ruth not only reclaimed their old farm, but also received substantial compensation. More importantly, dozens of other families regained their properties or received fair settlements. Frank became a key witness in the case, and after Richard's conviction, he was finally able to rebuild his life without constant threats. Dr. Thompson became a local hero, known as the lawyer who wasn't afraid to stand up to corruption. Mr. Peterson wrote a book about the case, which became a regional bestseller. Ethan returned to school in Green Valley, but now his classmates looked at him with newfound respect. He had stood up to a powerful, corrupt man and won. Jessica decided to return to Green Valley for good, resuming her life in the town where she grew up. She opened a small bookstore that quickly became a gathering place for people interested in social justice and human rights. Ruth, now reunited with her daughter and grandson, felt her family was whole again. She continued working as a seamstress, but with the peace of mind that the days of fear were over. And the family's old farm? Jessica, Ethan, and Ruth decided to turn it into a rural education center where children from the area could learn about sustainable farming and land rights. On the day of the center's inauguration, Ethan stood in the same spot where he had been abandoned with a shovel months before. But now, instead of being a place of fear and confusion, it was a symbol of hope and justice. "Grandma," he said to Ruth, "remember when you told me that when I didn't know what to do, I should trust my heart? I do. My heart told me not to give up, and it was right." Jessica approached the two, carrying a plaque that would be placed at the entrance of the center. It read, "Jessica Ethan Ruth Educational Center, where courage and truth bloom." "Mom," Ethan said, "why is my name in the middle?" "Because you were the one who had the courage to start all this. You were the one who decided to dig deeper, not just into the earth, but into the truth." Ethan smiled, looking at the shovel now resting against a nearby tree. It was no longer a tool of forced labor, but a symbol of his determination to unearth the truth. As families from the area began arriving for the inauguration, many brought their own children, kids who would now grow up knowing that honesty and courage could overcome corruption and injustice. Among the guests was Frank, now working as a supervisor for a local agricultural cooperative. He walked up to Ethan with a smile. "Son, thank you for giving me the courage to do the right thing. Thank you for helping me when I needed it most." "How so?" "When you pretended not to find the box. If you had handed me over to Richard that day, none of this would have happened." Frank laughed. "You know, Ethan, the truth is I was so nervous I didn't even search properly. Only later did I realize I'd seen where you hid it and decided it was better to pretend I found nothing. Either way, it was perfect timing." As the sun began to set on that special day, Ethan climbed a small rise to watch the celebration unfolding around the center. Families laughing, children playing, adults talking about plans for the future. Jessica joined him. "What's on your mind, son?" "I was thinking that when Richard left me here with a shovel, he thought he was punishing me. But really, he was giving me the tool to dig up the truth that would change everything. Sometimes the bad things that happen to us turn into opportunities to do good." "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you afraid Richard might still try something against us when he gets out of prison?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "No, Ethan. Richard has no power here anymore. All the people he used to intimidate now know the truth. And most importantly, we have the community's support now. So it's really over. This part is, but our responsibility to fight for justice never ends." Ethan looked at his mother with admiration. "Mom, I want to study law when I grow up. I want to be like Dr. Thompson." "That's an excellent choice. The world needs more people willing to stand up for the weak against the powerful." When the celebration ended and everyone had left, The family gathered on the porch of their home on Blossom Street. It was the first time in years the three of them had been together, at peace, unafraid of the future. "You know what's the most amazing part of this whole story?" Ruth said, rocking in her mother's old rocking chair. "What, Grandma?" "It all started with you being left behind with a shovel, but it ended with our family reunited and an entire community coming together for justice." "And do you know what the hardest part was?" Jessica said. "What?" "Trusting that the two of you could solve something I didn't have the courage to face alone." "You were brave," Ethan said. "So you gathered all the evidence, protected our family, and held on until we could fight together." Jessica smiled, feeling she could finally relax after years of carrying the weight of secrets and fears. "Ethan, there's something I never told you." "What?" "When you were a baby, I used to watch you sleep and dream of the day you'd be big enough to help me make things right. I never imagined it would be at 11 years old. Mom, I always knew there was something important I needed to do. I didn't know what, but I felt it. And now that we've done it, now we'll live the life we always deserved to have, together, without fear, and helping others whenever we can." Ruth stood up from her chair and hugged Jessica and Ethan at the same time. "My family is whole again." That night, Ethan slept in his own bed, in his own home, with his mother in the next room and his grandmother in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the next day, as she always did. Before falling asleep, he looked out the window toward the woods, where it all began. Instead of fear, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for finding the courage to dig deeper, for uncovering the truth, and for bringing his family back together. And he knew that no matter what challenges the future held, he would face them the same way he had faced Richard, with courage, determination, and surrounded by the people he loved. The shovel that had been the instrument of his trial was now kept in a special place at the educational center, not as a symbol of suffering, but as a reminder that sometimes we must dig deep to find the truth that can change everything. And every time a new child visited the center and asked about that special shovel, Ethan was ready to tell the story of how an 11-year-old boy, abandoned alone in the forest, used a simple tool to unearth justice and reunite his family. Because sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful, and sometimes the youngest people are the bravest. And so what began as a story of abandonment and fear became one of courage, family, and hope. The end of the story. Now tell us, what did you think of Ethan's courage? Leave your thoughts in the comments about how a child can change an entire community. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one.